Sometimes a song is just a song. A guy with a guitar has a thought. He puts it to a melody. He records it, people hear it, and that's it. The song means what the writer wanted it to mean. The story ends there. But that's not always how it works. Sometimes a song leaves the writer's hands and goes on a journey of its own. It gets picked up by someone else, a bigger someone. And that new person, with their giant voice and their even bigger audience, gives the song a new life, a new meaning, a meaning the writer never intended. This is a story about one of those songs. A song that started as a simple plea for personal understanding, a quiet request to see things from another person's point of view. But then a king got a hold of it, not a real king with a crown and a castle, a different kind of king. The king of rock and roll, and when he sang it, standing on a stage in Las Vegas, surrounded by gold and glamour, he accidentally turned it into something else. He turned it into a protest anthem. To get how this happened, you have to go back. You have to understand the world the song was born into. The late 1960s. America was not a calm place. It felt like the country was tearing itself apart. There was the war in Vietnam, a conflict that split generations. Young men were being drafted and sent halfway across the world to fight in jungles for reasons many people back home didn't understand or support. On college campuses, students were protesting. In the streets, people were marching. They were shouting, they were angry, and it wasn't just the war. The civil rights movement was at its peak. After decades, centuries of struggle, Black Americans were demanding equality, and they were fighting for the right to vote, the right to a fair wage, the right to be treated as human beings. The fight was messy. It was violent. There were leaders giving speeches about dreams, but there were also riots in the cities. There was hope, and there was a lot of fear. The country was divided. You had the establishment, and you had the counterculture. You had the hippies with their long hair and their peace signs, and you had the so-called silent majority, who looked at them with suspicion and distrust. It was a time of us versus them. It was young versus old, black versus white, Hawk versus Dove. There was very little middle ground. People weren't just disagreeing. They were judging each other, condemning each other. They weren't listening. The music of the time reflected this tension. Bob Dylan was singing about the times changing. The Creedence Clearwater Revival was singing about fortunate sons not being sent to war. Buffalo Springfield was singing about what happens when you step out of line. The music was political. It was angry. It was taking a side. The songs were weapons in a cultural war. Into this firestorm walks a man named Joe South. South was a brilliant songwriter from Georgia. He was a studio musician, a guy who could play anything. He wasn't a hippie radical. He wasn't part of the counterculture. He was a Southerner with a complex view of the world. He wrote a massive pop hit called Games People Play, a song that called out hypocrisy and hate. So he was clearly thinking about the state of things. He saw the division. He saw the anger. But he didn't want to write another angry song. He didn't want to pick a side. He wanted to do the opposite. He wanted to write a song that asked people to stop shouting for a minute and just try to understand each other. The idea he came up with was simple. It was an old saying, an idea that's been around for centuries, traced back to a Native American proverb. You can't truly understand a person until you've lived their life, until you've felt their pain, until you've seen the world through their eyes. So he wrote a song about it. The lyrics were direct. They weren't fancy. He started by talking about the constant judgment in the world. People looking down on others. People pointing fingers. He sang about how quick we are to abuse, criticize, and accuse. He put himself in the song, admitting he wasn't perfect. He said, "Lord knows I'm not a saint." It was a confession. It made the message humble. This wasn't a lecture from on high. It was a thought from a regular, flawed person. The core of the song was its chorus. A simple request. Before you judge me, just for a little while, put yourself in my place. Try on my life. See how it feels. The key line was about shoes, an everyday object, something everyone has. It was a powerful, simple metaphor. You can't know my journey until you've worn my shoes. The music itself wasn't aggressive. It was country soul. It had a steady, walking rhythm. It felt thoughtful. It was a song for thinking, not for shouting. Joe South recorded it, and it was a minor hit. People liked it. It resonated. It was a good song with a good message, and for most songs, that would have been the end of the story. It would be a well-regarded deep cut from a talented songwriter. But then Elvis heard it. By this point, Elvis Presley was in a very different place in his career. He wasn't the dangerous young rebel who shook his hips and scared parents in the 19th. So that Elvis was long gone. He spent most of the 1960s in Hollywood making a string of mediocre movies with forgettable soundtracks. He had become safe. He had become predictable. A product. But then came 1968. He did a television special, the '68 comeback special. Dressed head to toe in black leather, he looked lean and hungry again. He sang his old hits with a fire nobody had seen in years. He reminded the world that he was Elvis Presley. The King, it was a massive success. It restarted his career, but he didn't go back to being the old Elvis. He became a new kind of Elvis, the Las Vegas Elvis. He started a residency at the International Hotel. These weren't rock and roll shows in small theaters, these were spectacles. Where Elvis was on stage in a white jumpsuit, often with a cape. He had a full orchestra behind him, horn sections, string sections, a gospel choir. It was huge, it was grand, it was the definition of mainstream entertainment. Or Las Vegas was the opposite of the counterculture. It was the establishment in its most glittery, air-conditioned form. Elvis needed songs for these shows. He couldn't just sing Hound Dog and Jailhouse Rock all night. He needed bigger songs. Songs with emotional weight, songs that could fill a giant room and justify the power of the orchestra behind him. He was looking for material that showed him as a mature artist, a man with something to say. He found Joe South's song. It's not hard to see why it appealed to him. Elvis was arguably the most famous person in the world. He lived a life no one could possibly understand. He was a prisoner of his own fame. He was judged constantly. Every move he made was scrutinized. Every part of his life was public property. The idea of asking people to walk a mile in his shoes must have felt deeply personal. This wasn't a political statement for him, it was a personal one. He probably felt like the lyrics were written just for him. So he decided to perform it, and this is where the transformation begins. When Joe South sang it, it was a quiet plea. When Elvis sang it, it was a thunderous declaration. Imagine the scene. You're in a Vegas showroom in 1970. The lights go down. The orchestra starts with a dramatic, swelling intro. Then the drums kick in with a powerful, driving beat. And then that voice, Elvis's voice. It was deeper now, richer than it was in the 50s. You know, it was a force of nature. He didn't just sing the words, he commanded them. When he sang, "Before you abuse, criticize, and accuse," it wasn't a humble request. It sounded like a warning. It was a line drawn in the sand. He delivered it with such passion, such conviction. The personal plea in Joe South's version was still there, but Elvis layered something else on top of it. He layered power. He layered defiance. The performance became a centerpiece of his shows. It was also featured heavily in his 1970 documentary, Elvis, That's the Way It Is. The film showed the world this new Elvis, the hard-working professional, the charismatic showman, and it put this song front and center. Millions of people who would never go to Las Vegas saw him perform it on a movie screen. And this is where the audience takes over the story, because the audience in 1970 wasn't just hearing a song about personal understanding. They were hearing it through the filter of the times. They were hearing it through the lens of Vietnam, of the civil rights struggle, of the generation gap. Think about a young person protesting the war. They feel misunderstood by their parents. They feel judged by the government. They hear Elvis, this icon of the establishment, singing "Walk a Mile in My Shoes." They don't hear Elvis, the superstar, talking about the pressures of fame. They hear a message for them. They hear a defense of their position. They hear a call for the older generation to try and understand why they are so angry, why they are marching in the streets. The song becomes their anthem. Think about a black person fighting for basic human rights. They are abused, criticized, and accused every single day. They hear the song sung with the force of a gospel choir behind it. It sounds like a spiritual. It sounds like a demand for empathy from a world that has shown them none. The song becomes their anthem. The song's simple, universal message was its secret weapon. Because it didn't name a specific group, anyone could claim it. It was a blank slate. Any group that felt marginalized, judged, or misunderstood could pour their own meaning into it. The lyrics were a vessel, and the turmoil of the era was the content. Elvis was the catalyst. He was the one who amplified it. His own politics were famously conservative and hard to pin down. He was a supporter of law and order, a friend to President Nixon. He was not a protest singer. He wasn't Bob Dylan. He would have never sung an explicitly anti-war or pro-protest song. It wasn't who he was, and that's what makes the story so fascinating. He chose a song for personal reasons. He performed it in a way that suited his grand, theatrical style. But by doing so, he unintentionally gave the counterculture one of its most potent, adaptable anthems. He took a song that was meant to build bridges and, in the context of the times, turned it into a song that could be used to defend one side of a barricade. The song's power came from this contradiction. Here was Elvis Presley, the ultimate mainstream superstar, performing in Las Vegas, the capital of mainstream entertainment. And he was singing a song that was being adopted by people who saw themselves as being outside the mainstream. The very act of him singing it gave the message a strange kind of validation. It was as if the king himself was saying, "These people you are judging, you need to hear them out." Whether he meant to or not, didn't matter. That's what people heard. Over time, this interpretation stuck. The song became a shorthand for social justice. It became a plea for tolerance. When people wanted to make a point about understanding the oppressed, the misunderstood, or the other, this song was the go-to reference. It was quoted by activists. It was used in diversity training seminars. It entered the language as a profound moral statement. Joe South, the man who wrote it, watched all this happen. He had written a simple, heartfelt song about looking at life from another man's perspective. He likely never imagined it being used as a protest song. His original recording is still there. Well, it's quieter, more personal, but it's Elvis's version that echoes through history. It's the version with the soaring orchestra and the gospel singers. It's the version drenched in Vegas spotlights. Elvis continued to perform the song for years. It remained a staple of his shows. For him, it probably always remained a personal statement about his own unique, isolated life. But every night he sang it for thousands of people in the audience and millions more who would buy the records, it meant something else. It was a reflection of a divided world's desperate need for empathy. It's a strange path for a song to take. From a quiet thought in Georgia to a cinematic moment in the documentary to a rallying cry for social change. It wasn't planned. It was an accident of timing, interpretation, and performance. The song was the right message at the right time. The singer was the right voice to make everyone pay attention. The song's genius is that it never tells you who to feel empathy for. It just tells you to feel it. It doesn't tell you whose shoes to wear. It just insists that you take off your own for a moment. In a time of shouting, it was a song about listening. And because Elvis Presley sang it, the whole world listened. He gave it a platform bigger than its writer could have ever dreamed of. He made it monumental. And in doing so, he made a personal plea into a public demand. He made it an anthem. The song was Walk a Mile in My Shoes.